The wind had a way of whispering through the canyon that made even silence feel alive. It carried with it the scent of sagebrush and old pine, a dry, cracked perfume that settled over the land like memory. Tom Briggs adjusted the brim of his dusty felt hat and leaned against the fence post, his weathered fingers curling around the wood. He watched the ridgeline with the patience of a man who had long ago stopped waiting for anything but still noticed everything. 72 and alone by choice, Tom lived on a stretch of land most folks had forgotten. The ranch had once bustled with the sounds of cattle and laughter, but now it held mostly ghosts. His wife had passed a decade ago, and the kids were scattered like dandelion seeds, caught up in lives too full to remember the man who'd once lifted them onto horseback. He didn't blame them. Life moved on. But in the quiet, when the fire cracked low and the coffee sat cooling on the table, he felt the ache of that stillness. Not sadness exactly, just a sense of having been useful once, and now no longer. That morning, the sun hadn't yet climbed above the horizon when the call came. "Tom, sorry to bother you so early," came the shaky voice of Pete Watkins, the park ranger who patrolled the edge of Bighorn Valley. "We've got a situation." Tom didn't ask questions. He simply threw on his coat, tugged on his boots, and hitched up the old horse trailer behind his battered truck. When Pete said situation, it usually meant a Mustang had wandered too close to town, or worse, been hit crossing the highway. But this time was different. The mare was collapsed in a gulch, her dark coat slick with sweat and caked mud. She was beautiful, even in distress, a deep bay with a tangled mane and haunted eyes. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Tom could see the tension rippling across her belly. "She's trying to foal," Pete said, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Got separated from the herd. Must have been running from coyotes or something." Tom squatted beside her, murmuring gently. The mare's ears flicked back, but she didn't try to move. That told him everything. She was too weak and scared beyond words. "She's been laboring for too long," he muttered. "If we don't help her, she won't make it. Neither will the foal." Pete didn't answer, just gave a short nod and stepped back. This part belonged to Tom. It had been years since he delivered a foal. A part of him doubted his hands, but muscle memory has a way of returning when it matters most. He worked in silence, calming the mare with quiet words and steady touch, coaxing her through the hardest part. Time slowed to a syrupy drip. Then, with one final, wrenching effort, the foal came. It hit the ground in a rush of motion and stillness, a tangle of legs, wet fur, and shallow breath. Tom pulled his jacket off and gently rubbed the little creature down. The foal was alive, but it was what happened next that froze the blood in Tom's veins. A sharp whistle pierced the air, an unnatural, human sound. Then movement. On the ridge above, two figures emerged from behind the brush. One held binoculars, the other a rifle. "Poachers," Pete growled, reaching for the radio on his belt. But Tom already knew. Wild Mustangs had become targets in recent months. Not for meat, not even for rodeos. The market had grown darker. Foreign buyers paid well for rare bloodlines, strong stock with wild spirit. The mare must have been tracked for days. And now, with her weakened and her foal fresh in the dirt, she was easy pickings. "Get back," Tom whispered to Pete, eyes locked on the men. "Get to the truck and radio for backup." Pete hesitated, then moved. The figures above shouted, whether at each other or down at Tom. It wasn't clear, but the sound broke the tension like glass underfoot. Tom stood up slowly, blocking the mare and foal with his body. His hands were open, empty. "Ain't your business here," he called out, voice calm but carrying. The man with the rifle stepped forward, emboldened by distance. "Those horses are unbranded. That makes them fair game." Tom didn't flinch. "That mare just gave birth. She's not going anywhere, and neither are you." There was a pause. Then a single shot rang out, not toward Tom, but into the sky. A warning. A message. "Last chance, old man." The shooter yelled. "Step aside." Tom stared up at them, the dry wind tugging at his shirt. His fingers curled at his sides. He didn't speak. The mare nudged the foal with her nose, gently, as if willing it to stand. Another sound interrupted the standoff. Sirens, faint but unmistakable, echoing through the canyon. The poachers cursed, turned, and bolted for the brush. In moments, they were gone. Tom dropped to his knees beside the mare again, relief flooding his limbs like warmth after a long frost. The foal stirred, weak but responsive. He watched it struggle, blink against the sun, and finally, miraculously, stand. Pete came running back, breathless. "Backup's on the way. I got their plates." But Tom barely heard him. He was staring at the foal, now wobbling toward its mother. The mare turned her head and, just for a moment, met Tom's eyes. There was something there. Not gratitude, not recognition. Something older, deeper. It was then he saw it, the brand, hidden beneath a layer of dried mud on her shoulder. Barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a faded mark. Not the government-issued kind. This was hand-burned, ragged, cruel. A private brand. Tom stood slowly, the pieces beginning to slide into place. "She wasn't wild," he said softly. "She was taken." Pete frowned. "What?" "She escaped," Tom said, more to himself than anyone else. "She was part of a string, probably held somewhere illegal. She got out. Somehow." The foal pressed close to its mother, the sun lighting its coat, like a fire sparked to life. Tom watched them for a long while, something stirring in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. They would need shelter, food, time to heal. He'd have to report the brand, follow the process. But first, he needed to get them home. By the time the deputies arrived, the mare was loaded gently into the trailer, her foal nestled beside her on a bed of hay and torn blankets. Tom answered the questions with quiet clarity, his eyes never straying far from the animals. As the sun began to sink, turning the sky the color of worn copper, Tom pulled into his ranch and backed the trailer into the barn. The place had stood mostly unused for years, but tonight, it felt alive. Dust motes danced in the golden light, and the scent of fresh hay mingled with something deeper. Hope, maybe. He led the mare inside, speaking softly, guiding her to the stall he'd once built for his daughter's first pony. The foal followed on shaky legs, already stronger. Tom stood in the doorway long after they'd settled, his hand resting on the wooden frame, eyes wet but unblinking. Something had changed. The mare had survived. The foal had lived. And Tom, for the first time in a long while, felt like he'd been exactly where he was supposed to be. He didn't know what would come next, not exactly. But as he turned off the barn light and stepped back into the night, the stars seemed just a little brighter. The wind no longer whispered of endings. It carried the hush of something beginning. The days that followed moved slowly, like honey sliding down glass. Each morning, Tom rose before the sun and walked the familiar path from his back porch to the barn, his boots leaving soft impressions in the dew-damp grass. The mare, who he'd quietly started calling Luna because of the pale crescent-shaped scar near her left eye, stood protectively near her foal, who had grown more confident with each hour. The little colt had a fire in him, curious, defiant, and already trying to race the wind in the narrow barn aisle. Tom named him Flint. He hadn't intended to name them. He hadn't intended for any of this. Pete stopped by every other day, bringing updates and checking on the horses. The poachers had vanished. The license plates were fake, and the trail went cold quickly. There was talk of a possible holding site, an abandoned property off Highway 14, but no evidence had been found. Still, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that someone would come looking. One afternoon, while mucking the stall, he paused to watch Luna. She stood with her head lowered, ears twitching as Flint tried to nibble at her tail. There was something haunted in her eyes, a distance she never quite closed. She didn't flinch when Tom entered, but she never let her guard down either. Not fully. He understood that. Trust took time. That evening, Tom sat on the back porch with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand, the weight of silence pressing on his shoulders. He could still feel the burn of the sun on his neck, the soreness in his knees from work he hadn't done in years. But deeper than that was a different ache, a kind of nervous anticipation. The foal's birth had stirred something in him, something raw and unfinished. He'd spent a lifetime putting pieces back together, fences, roofs, engines, broken promises. But this was different. This felt like being handed a second chance, without knowing what the first one had been for. The knock came after dark. 3 sharp raps on the wooden door. Not urgent, but deliberate. Tom rose slowly, his spine tightening. He turned off the porch light and opened the door halfway, the chain still latched. A woman stood in the shadows, mid-30s, lean, with a worn canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. Her clothes were practical, riding boots, jeans, and a faded flannel shirt. Her face was taut with fatigue, but her eyes were alert. "Are you Tom Briggs?" she asked, her voice low and even. "Who's asking?" "My name's Clara Holt. I think you have something that belongs to me." Tom stared at her. Then, slowly, he unlatched the chain. They stood in the living room a few minutes later, the floorboards creaking beneath them. Clara didn't sit. She paced, eyes flicking toward the window that faced the barn. "She was mine," she said finally, her voice thin. "The mare. Luna." Tom didn't respond right away. He set the coffee mug down on the table, then walked to the window and looked out, as if to confirm she was still there. "I figured someone might come," he said. "She was taken 6 months ago," Clara continued, "from my ranch in Utah. They broke the locks. Took 3 of my best Mustangs. Luna was the youngest. She wasn't even fully saddle-trained." "How'd you find me?" Clara opened the backpack and pulled out a folder. Inside were printed photos, images of Luna before she was taken, grazing in wide, golden fields. There was also a still frame from a trail camera showing a truck and trailer pulling away from her ranch, barely visible through the dust. "I've been tracking them myself," she said. "Law enforcement gave up weeks ago. Said it wasn't enough to go on. But I followed the signs. Heard about an incident near Bighorn Valley. Mare and Foal, rescued from poachers. The description matched. So I came." Tom studied the photos, then glanced at Clara. "You sure it's her?" She nodded once. "The scar on her face. I gave it to her, accidentally. She spooked during a storm, ran into the gate. I stayed up all night cleaning the wound. I'd know her anywhere." He didn't argue. He didn't need to. But the question hung between them like smoke. "Now what?" "You want to take her back," he said flatly. "She's mine," Clara said. "I've looked for her every day since she disappeared." Tom nodded slowly. Then he said, "And the foal?" Clara hesitated. "He's not mine," she admitted. "But he wouldn't exist if not for her. I'll take them both, if you'll let me." The weight in Tom's chest thickened, sank. He looked back out the window. "She doesn't trust people," he said. "Not yet. Not even me." "I know," Clara said, her voice softer now. "But I do. I trust her. That's all that matters." For the first time, he looked her in the eyes, and what he saw there wasn't desperation or entitlement. It was devotion, raw, painful, and real. A bond that had never broken, only been frayed by distance. Still, he didn't answer. Not that night. They agreed Clara could stay in the guest room. In the morning, she rose early, boots crunching gravel as she approached the barn. Tom watched from a distance. Luna lifted her head, but didn't bolt. Flint circled his mother, curious, but cautious. Clara didn't reach out. She simply stood near, murmuring familiar words, letting the wind carry her scent. By the second morning, Luna had taken a few slow steps toward her. On the third, she allowed Clara to touch her muzzle. Tom stood by the fence and said nothing. Later that afternoon, Clara joined him on the porch. "She's remembering," she said, sitting carefully beside him. "That's all it is. Just remembering how to feel safe." Tom nodded. He sipped his coffee, stared out at the horizon. Then, without turning his head, he asked, "What will you do with them?" Clara tilted her head, surprised. "You mean after I take them home?" "Yes. I'll keep them together," she said. "No branding. No pressure. I have land, pasture, time. I train horses, but only when they're ready, and never when they say no." Tom considered that. Then he said, "Good." A long pause settled between them, comfortable in its silence. "You lost someone," Clara said suddenly. Tom looked at her, startled. "I can see it in how you carry yourself, in how you talk. You've lost someone, and you're still figuring out what to do with the part of you that stayed behind." He stared at her for a long time, eyes narrowing just slightly. Then he gave a short, tired smile. "My wife," he said. "Cancer. Took her slow, then all at once." Clara's voice dropped. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "She loved horses more than I ever did. She would have stayed up all night with that mare." They sat together a while longer, saying nothing more. That night, Tom walked to the barn alone. Luna stood with her head low, eyes soft. Flint was curled beside her, legs tucked under like folded origami. Tom leaned on the stall rail, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of their breath. He thought about Clara's offer, about how Luna had started leaning into her touch again, about the way Flint had begun to mimic every movement his mother made, ears twitching, nostrils flaring, hooves dancing across the straw. They didn't belong to him. Not really. He had only been the bridge. But sometimes, bridges are what keep the broken parts from washing away. The next morning, Tom helped Clara load the horses. It wasn't easy. Luna paused at the trailer door, flanks quivering, as if deciding whether the world was worth stepping back into. But Clara waited, patient. No lead rope, no pressure, just presence. Eventually, Luna climbed in. Flint followed without hesitation. Tom walked up to the open trailer door and looked in one last time. The mare met his gaze, then lowered her head slightly. He couldn't say what it meant, only that it felt like a goodbye. Or maybe, just maybe, a thank you. "You'll send photos?" he asked. "Every month," Clara promised. He handed her a small bundle, an old leather halter, cracked and softened by time. It had belonged to his wife's first horse. "She'd want this passed on," he said. Clara took it reverently. "Thank you." As the truck pulled away, Tom stood in the driveway until the dust settled. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. But inside, something shifted. He turned back toward the barn, not empty, not exactly, but different now. A little quieter, a little fuller. There was still time. For healing. For starting again. For remembering how to feel safe. "You said." The days that followed were still, quiet in a way Tom hadn't felt in years. The barn echoed differently now, its silence deeper without the soft nickers and hoofbeats that had filled it for weeks. Mornings arrived the same, mist curling through the fields, birdsong rising like breath, but the rhythm of his chores had changed. He still walked the length of the paddocks, still checked the fences, and fed the chickens. Yet everything felt a half-step out of sync, like music missing its melody. Sometimes he imagined Flint's sharp whinny echoing from the hilltop. Other times, he half expected to hear the rustle of straw and catch Luna's wary eyes peering at him from the shadows. But those moments passed, and reality set back in with the soft creak of the barn door and the empty stalls staring back at him. He wasn't sure what to do with the space they left behind. 2 weeks later, a letter came in the mail. No return address, just his name printed in neat, confident handwriting. Inside was a photograph. Luna and Flint stood in a sunlit pasture, wildflowers curling around their hooves, mountains blue in the distance. Flint was taller now, his legs straighter, more sure. Luna stood beside him, eyes calm. There was something in her posture, a quiet pride. She looked like she belonged again. Tom turned the photo over. On the back, Clara had written just 5 words. "They're finding their way home." He read it twice, then 3 more times. And still he sat at the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold. That evening, he pulled out the old wooden box that had been tucked in the back of his closet for years. Inside were photographs, sepia-toned and creased at the corners, of his wife holding her first foal, brushing down a gray mare with her hair tied back and sun in her eyes. There were letters, dried flowers, and a small notebook she had kept during her final months. He hadn't opened it since the funeral. Now, he flipped through its pages, letting her words breathe again. "I believe animals know something we don't. They carry stories we forgot how to tell." Tom sat back, the weight of her handwriting pressing against his chest like a familiar hand. The next morning, he drove out to the county livestock shelter. It was a modest facility on the edge of town, weathered fences, a few leaning sheds, and more need than resources. He hadn't been there in years, not since he and his wife had adopted a stray gelding named Jasper, who'd ended up living out his days on their pasture. A young woman with a sun hat and hay-streaked jeans met him near the paddock. "Help you with something?" "I'm looking for a horse," Tom said. "Not a perfect one, just one that needs a place." She studied him for a beat, then nodded. "They all do." She led him past the pens, some filled with thin, dull-eyed horses who barely lifted their heads as they passed. Some were young, some old, some clearly abused, others simply forgotten. One in particular caught his attention. A dun mare, ribs showing but eyes bright. She stood alone in the far corner, ears flicking at every sound, muscles tense. But she watched him, not with fear, with recognition. Tom didn't move closer. He just stood there, letting her look. "What's her name?" he asked. The woman checked a clipboard. "Doesn't have one. Came in 2 days ago. Owner passed away. Family didn't want her. She's a little flighty, but she's sound. Just needs patience." Tom nodded slowly. "I'll take her." The paperwork was simple, and by afternoon, the trailer rolled back into his driveway with a new passenger. She stepped out cautiously, tail swishing, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scents of the land. But her hooves didn't falter. Tom guided her to the same stall where Luna had stood, the same place Flint had taken his first shaky steps. As he shut the gate behind her, she turned, watching him. He named her Sage. That night, the barn felt different again, no longer empty, not yet full, just alive in a new way. Each day, Tom worked with her. Not training, exactly, just being near. He'd bring an apple, talk softly, clean her stall with long, slow motions. He didn't try to force her. He just showed up. After a week, she stopped retreating when he entered. By the second, she let him brush her mane. One morning, Pete showed up with a beat-up thermos and 2 gas station burritos. "Figured I'd find you out here," he said, handing one over. "Heard about the new girl." Tom grunted, peeling back the wrapper. "She's quiet," he said. Pete took a bite, then leaned against the fence. "You ever think about doing more with this place? I mean, you've still got land. Got time. Maybe there are more like her. Horses needing something steady. And maybe you're the one who needs them too." Tom didn't answer right away. He looked at Sage, now standing close enough to sniff his elbow. "I'm not a rescue center." "No," Pete said. "You're not. But maybe you're a beginning." The words settled into him like roots. That afternoon, Tom found himself walking the perimeter of his property, counting how many paddocks he could section off. He started scribbling numbers on a notepad, rough sketches of shelter plans, feed costs, vet visits. It wasn't a decision, not yet, but it was a possibility, and that was enough. A week later, another letter arrived. Inside was a photo of Flint with a small girl perched on his back, Clara holding the lead rope, both smiling like the sun had never stopped shining. Below it, she'd written, he let her ride him, just for a minute, and he didn't bolt. Tom smiled at that, then turned the card over and saw something else. A check. Not much, but enough to cover lumber for a new stall. There was a note paper-clipped to it. For the next one. By spring, he'd taken in 2 more. One was an old draft gelding with a limp. The other, a skittish paint mare who wouldn't let anyone touch her. Sage had begun to lead the others, not aggressively, but gently, guiding them to water, to shade, to stillness. She stood beside them when storms rolled through, her head high. Tom didn't call it a rescue. He just said they were family. Sometimes Clara would write. Once she and Flint visited. The colt had grown strong, his coat sleek and eyes alert. He remembered Tom. At least, Tom liked to think so. When the truck pulled away that time, Flint looked back. That night, Tom stood in the barn with Sage at his side. He thought about all the things he had lost, and all the things he had gained by accident. He remembered the cold night Luna had wandered onto his land, swollen with life, alone and unguarded. How Flint had been born in straw and silence. How that small spark of chaos had cracked open something inside him he hadn't realized had closed. Now there were hoofbeats again. New ones. Each with their own story, their own scars. Tom didn't need to know them all. He just needed to be the one who stayed. The next morning, as the sun cracked through the trees, lighting the frost-laced fields in gold, Tom opened the barn doors wide. The air was crisp, clean. The horses stirred, snorting, shifting in their stalls. He didn't rush. Instead, he leaned against the doorway, arms folded. Then, with a soft whistle, he said, "Come on now." And one by one, they stepped into the light.